I have to say, this event is like part tech, part fashion. 'Cause everybody looks so good on
I knew
stage.
you were going to come and really bring the game, so I thought I had to do a little bit of an effort, you know.
Well, we love it. Look, a lot of people know about your writing, and Sifted, I believe, is about people, product, purpose. Is that correct?
That's what I write about, but we write about European tech at Sifted.
Excellent. Yeah. And now the question is, outside of that, what excites you? What triggers you? What's got your attention?
So I'm also an investor, I know, boo hiss, but I also run a coding school for women called 23 Code Street. We operate in the UK, and for every student that we have in the UK, we fund a woman in the slums of Mumbai in India.
Okay.
We initially started with like digital skills training for the women in India, but as COVID hit and stuff, we've kind of expanded to more sort of social welfare, period education, and anything that kind of supports women's growth outside of the home.
Incredible.
Yeah, so that's been fun.
That's awesome. I know you can find out more about her online. I was checking out some of her writings and stuff, so amazing stuff. She's got together a panel that's going to be seated over here, and questions that you're welcome to share. And maybe if you have a couple minutes as well, we've got some microphones that can roam, so feel free to interact as much as possible. So with that, I think the panelists are ready. So I'm going to leave the stage to you, Anisah, and let's welcome up our panelists.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Oh, it's so great to have you all up here. So my name is Anisah Osman Britton. As mentioned, I'm a Startup Life reporter at Sifted. I get the really fun job of to go behind the scenes of, you know, all those flashy headlines of billion-dollar statuses, unicorn valuations, all that stuff, and actually find out what it takes to build a company. Outside of that, I guess I've dedicated my career to finding out how the hell we create a tech workforce that represents the society that we live in, and not just represents it, includes us in maybe a better way than society does to us day to day. And it's kind of interesting because this panel does not reflect what the tech industry looks like right now. So funny, we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion. Thank you all so much for being here with me, Kaidi, Kiran, Michael. It would be great if you could briefly introduce who you are and what it is that you do.
Yes, Kaidi Ruusalepp is my name. I'm the founder and CEO of Funderbeam. I'm the first female founder in Estonia who raised international capital for a female-founded startup company in Estonia. And as of this year, there's a wonderful, we call it a volunteer organization called Estonian Founders Society, which collects and represents the most successful Estonian startup founders. We have 200 members, and the president of this Founders Society as of this year is a female, so I'm happy to hold this position this year. So we do everything to make this startup society here in Estonia as inclusive and as diverse as possible.
Thank you. Kiran?
Sure. So I'm actually a lawyer by background. So up until January this year, I was an equity partner at a US firm called Ropes & Gray, which is a big private equity venture capital advisory firm. I was one of the only actual brown-faced partner in the private equity team, which was like a $700 million business for us globally. So I left in January of this year, and I'm now a full-time investor, focused on investing in women and other underrepresented groups, including people of color, sexuality, socioeconomic.
Amazing. Michael, you've obviously just done a keynote, which I'm giving you a little bit of a breather from.
Thank you.
But for those who've just walked in, would you mind giving us a bit of a brief background?
Sure. So I'm Michael Lints, based out of Singapore, partner at Golden Gate Ventures. We're an early stage VC firm. We focus on Southeast Asia. And I'm a executive producer of a documentary as well.
And the documentary is called Broken Chains, is that correct? Where can people find that for those who've just come in?
Oh my goodness, that's a story itself. It should be on a major platform, which I can't mention, within a month or so.
Okay, great. We'll keep an eye out for that. So we all know that diversity is good and it's just something that we should be doing. But let's talk about, for the people who need convincing, its impact on innovation. Does diversity impact the products that we are seeing out in the public? Kaidi, let's start with you.
Yeah, okay, I'll start, and actually I'll in a way I'll stand up because the blouse, nicely what I'm wearing is a Ukrainian blouse, Vyshyvanka, and today is National Vyshyvanka Day. And that's the story why I wanted to tell about the diversity and inclusion. So the blouse was given to me by the refugees, Ukrainian refugees that stay in our house. And we all know how to cook a soup. And the borscht soup, we know how to do it. But the way the Ukrainian family taught me how to make a real borscht soup 2 weeks ago, that's the best ever soup and borscht one I've got in my life. And now if you think the soup, the same soup, but when you get the pieces from the right parts of the world, from the right cultures of the world, then what you get the best ever in the world. You just don't get the good one, but you get the best one. So if you have really good coders in some of the country, you include them, and you have a good feminine leadership, and you include it, and you have different religion, and you include it. This is what you get. You get the best team, and you get the best product. So that's why I think the inclusion and diversity, it's not only about including as such, but it's because you really get the best out of what is there in the world.
Thank you, and this is a beautiful, beautiful shirt.
Beautiful.
So what I'm hearing, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, Kiran, do we think that underrepresented founders are solving for different problems, or is that a little bit of a myth?
I think there's a mix, right? So there are definitely a subset of underrepresented founders that are looking to build products that are there to serve underrepresented founders, and we see that mostly with female founders, developing products for females, be it in the femtech world, be it in female finance. There's a lot going on there, but not necessarily. And founders are founders of a business that they are passionate about, and that is universal, right? So we equally see as many founders, if not more, who are actually just building products for the wider demand base. So it really just depends which part of the economy they're looking to fit into or disrupt.
So let's talk about that first bit, Elizabeth, and I'll open this to either of you. There are a lot of people who are solving problems closest to home, may that be immigration, may that be period trackers, may that be menopause. And what we sometimes hear is these markets are niche, even though 50% of the world is women, in case anyone wondered, and probably about 45% of those menstruate at some point in life. How do we find those founders and how do we support them, given that there is this view that it is potentially niche? Do you see that as a challenge, or do you see that as something that is a good thing to have, like an extra tick against their name? I'd love to understand what this niche market opinion is.
Yeah, I can kick off. There's a good example in the US where it's female black hair, which is a huge industry. Mm-hmm. And there are the two founders in New York. They started a business which focuses purely on just female black hair. And if you look at it from a distance, you might say that's super niche. There's like a very small group. It's specifically about hair extension, and I don't even know how this works, but they decided to build a business. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Only when they got to, I think, Series B or Series C, folks said, hey, I want to invest because this is interesting. I think there is, the reason why they were founded as a company and why they got invested at the early stage was there was an investor was black and who understands from his sisters and from his moms how does her extensions work. So I think going back to having a diverse team, if this investor would be part of a venture capital firm that had a diverse mindset, they would have invested in this company. So I do think that it might sound as a niche, but these industries are huge.
I completely agree. I think there is a perception that it's niche, but the perception is set by an investor community that just doesn't understand that part of the population, that part of the need, to say, and we've had conversations with many other investors in the community in established VC firms that kind of talk about what we're doing is, I get it. It's a bit niche, right? To invest in female and underrepresented founders. Because they have nobody on their investment team, whether they be even female, right? You add in color or, sexuality or anything like that, to the point that Michael was saying earlier, percentage drops even further. But who are in the position to actually write checks, who are actually making the investment decision in the fund. And anything that fits outside of what those particular individuals feel comfortable talking about, feel comfortable investing in. I mean, just don't mention the menopause, just don't mention period. That they feel comfortable talking about is niche in their mind.
It is. That's exactly what I wanted to say. So if you think about who dominates the VC capital, it's sorry to say, white male. And for them, it's a niche because they don't, in their world, this problem doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. And I would say, and I've seen so many VCs, I'm a female founder, sometimes I think that the next CEO of Funderbeam is going to be a man because I don't think my company deserves to go through the struggle because they have a female founder, right? But I call this capital a coward capital, a coward because they are afraid to invest into something that is out of comfort zone to them. They don't understand it. This problem doesn't exist. Or, oh, come on, female founder, you solve the problems in more like, soft way. That's not the way that the company should be operated. And more importantly, and what is sick in this industry, is that female founders are taught and educated how to pitch to the male VCs. But have you heard any trainings of the VCs to understand the diverse founders, right? And it goes into the age, it goes into the gender, it goes into the religion, absolutely everything. So it has to change. And like I said, the problem doesn't exist in their world, but this doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist. And they call it the niche market.
I think it'll be interesting going into the cycle that we're going into now, right? Because I think VCs in their current, demographic have been able to operate in that way and be completely unquestioned, right? They've been able to write checks. They've been able to write checks for businesses that probably shouldn't have had a check, certainly shouldn't have had the valuations that they were getting. They were able to do that without any accountability to LPs. LPs themselves are not necessarily accountable. Now that we're going into a different cycle, I think there is, I'm sure there will be greater scrutiny. I think VCs are going to have to look harder for what should be better investments, serving a better, broader part of society. I think it will be really interesting to see whether the current VC crop can do that, whether LPs are going to be prepared to back emerging managers. It will have to be an emerging manager who is prepared to do things differently, who wants to do things differently. Now, there is no better time, I think, to do that than now. It'll be very interesting to see whether the appetite or the recognition actually exists in the VC market to be able to bridge that, what is a huge gap currently.
For those who maybe don't know, could you talk a little bit, maybe briefly, about what you mean about the new cycle that we are seeing, or the downturn, as some people are calling it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, the investor base in VC is definitely pulling back, right? There's a lot of people who are burnt by what has gone on in the US tech stocks. It's definitely feeding into later stage valuations that were just inflated like crazy rounds. Everybody's read about Tiger. Shafali's talk yesterday, for those that were able to listen to it, the charts with SoftBank, and that is going to have a ripple effect. It is having a ripple effect. So I think there's definitely a big part of the community that is kind of having to sit back and do a huge amount of portfolio management right now. And that also goes for LPs. What we have seen over a long time is that it's the same LPs backing the same VC funds who have been investing in the same late stage valuations. And so it's going to be interesting to see actually what it's going to take for them, to look at actually what's happened, to analyze critically how they've gotten into this situation, and to see what they may do differently in the future. I think the real challenge, unfortunately, I would say, is that particularly in the LP base, by no means everyone, there are definitely some outliers, but in the LP base, it's not a very entrepreneurial set of people, generally speaking, right? It's not necessarily in their interest to do any self-critique. They're not accountable to anyone. They don't report to anyone. And it will be very interesting to see whether there is actually any push, whether there is any drive, or whether actually everyone just goes into a bunker for a while and waits for things to pass and for sentiment to change.
Okay, so there's two threads I want to pull there. Michael, I'll start with the first one. Do you think with this change that VCs are going to say, hey, we really need to start diversifying our investments? Or do you think they may do the opposite of that and be like, oh shit, everything is going to shit, let me just do what I know? What do you think the way, the road they're going to take is?
Yeah, I think we're going to have two issues. The first one is going to be VCs are going to take a step back and either be a bit more conservative because no one knows what's going to be coming ahead. They are concerned about valuations, and they might say, you know what, instead of 12 deals a year, I'll do 7. And those 7 are going to be safer bets than I did in 2020 or in 2021. That's definitely something that you'll see over time, because no one knows who is going to be picking up that next round check, right? If it is in Tiger or SoftBank, who's it going to be? So that's going to be one part. The second part, and that's to me that's more concerning, that's around the LP landscape. LPs tend not to look at emerging managers the way they should. So what they're currently doing is you're an emerging manager, you're from an underrepresented group, and you want to launch your first fund. The first question you get is, what is your track record? And you're like, I don't have any because I just started. Okay. What is about your own committed capital? Like, well, I come from a different background. I don't have any committed capital. That group is entirely excluded from building their own VC fund. So if you want to have more diversity and more inclusion, you need to include those managers as well, because those managers tend to find those gems that we call niche, which aren't niche, and are willing to take a bet on them. So I do feel that the traditional VCs will pull back a little bit. So I'm not counting them to kind of pick up those niche markets. And the ones that we need to invest in those niche companies don't get the backing from LPs, and that is concerning.
Just to build on that briefly, which I completely agree with, the other thing that we've heard in the market a lot is when it comes to track record, is that it's and what's the meaning of an emerging manager even, right? There are a lot of established institutional LPs that when they talk about emerging managers, what they mean is a spin out from an existing VC. They're not talking about a true emerging manager. And that doesn't help investment in underrepresented groups or women, right? It just doesn't help because there are not enough VCs, particularly in senior positions in the current landscape, who work in the same fund, who are going to be able to spin out, right, and to build a business, to have experience of running that business on their own. So it's going to require people who are aligned in that mission. And also, it's not, to the point that you made earlier, it's not because there aren't returns, right? There is a huge amount of value there for the taking, But it's going to require a group of people who come together, who are aligned, who have the experience, right? Who know how to source those deals with those founders to do that. Anyone coming together from different places, doesn't matter how long you've known each other, it doesn't matter how long you've invested together, will struggle with the current definition of emerging manager with the big institutional LPs. There are exceptions, as ever, but the LP base has a lot to do in changing that landscape, facilitating that change.
I just want to clarify something for the audience, for people who don't know. A lot of the times when emerging managers raise a fund, they are expected to put a certain percentage of their own personal money into the fund. To raise that money, it's kind of their proof that they are committed to that fund for the next 5 to 10 years. So when Michael says why they're asking if you've got wealth, it's because of that. You're meant to put up X percentage depending whether you're going for pre-seed or you're going a bit further along the line. What we're seeing now and the new innovation, which is meant to make it more inclusive, is that you can say, hey, I'm going to pay this money over time. So say if your salary was going to be 70K, 5K of that every month, 5K of that every month, 5K of that every year will go into the fund itself, and that's your commitment. And it's, again, trying to move away from this idea that you have to have wealth to create wealth. Yeah. Again, this is just for understanding in case someone doesn't know. So the second bit I wanted to put on your thread, Kiran, was on LPs. Estonia is very interesting in terms of LPs. We're seeing this cycle of money come through from unicorn companies have come through, operators who have made some money, who are investing. Do you think this change in LP demographic is changing the way investment looks in Estonia and globally?
Estonia goes through exactly the same cycle what Europe is going through. So the new funds are set, and what I really like about the new VC funds that are set and to be set, and what you are also doing, many of my actually VC firm associates are now setting up their own VC funds. But that change, in a way, comes slowly. So the new VCs that are set are more diverse, and the LPs are diverse. But to be strong and to have the voice, like you said, and you also mentioned you have to have a capital. So this change in Estonia is that a couple of female founders now who are employees, ex-employees of the large unicorns who now have capital are starting to deploy the capital. And they deploy the capital to female founders and very diverse set of founders. But change is slow, but it's getting there, and Estonia is going through it. But I would say a bit more too slowly. We should be doing better.
So what's the solution? What do we need LPs to do? Do we need to say, hey, in the same way you have CSR targets, you need diversity targets in your investment? Is that a solution?
That is one thing. I'm not a great believer of those quotas. Mm-hmm. I'm not a great believer, because if you have a quota, then quota is something kind of, okay, we'll do it. When you invest, it has to come from the heart, and also from the LPs. It has to come as, because I want, because I believe, like you mentioned, right? Actually, the performance of the very diverse teams is the same or even the better, and that goes for the VCs. That has to come from somewhere. But I think one thing is to lead by the example and to tell the stories. And also I'm very proud by the setup of this event to have very the diverse group of speakers, diverse group of people. So it's getting there.
Michael, what do you think? Obviously, you're seeing a slightly different take on what diversity looks like in Singapore. Yeah. How do you think the LP demographic plays into the change of emerging managers, and what are you kind of seeing from that part of the world?
Well, they continue to play a big role in this. I think where we are seeing, we're seeing VCs investing in other VCs. That's kind of one way the solution is slowly happening. You see it in the US, you see it even in Asia. So as managers, we personally invest in other funds, in emerging managers, just to give them a shot to kind of raise their first fund. The downside is that those checks are relatively small, so it doesn't move the needle as much as you would hope, because you need pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, to kind of take a bigger step. I would say that the conversation has shifted over the past 12 months. You're seeing more and more institutional capital, at least having a conversation internally. When ESG is one example, they tend to focus on the E and less on the S, unfortunately, but there is sort of some conversation happening. I think we need numbers. So as what can I do myself as a manager is try to invest as much as possible that I can into other diverse managers and kind of give them the first shot and help them, and at least showcase that these managers are able to generate returns, which then opens the eyes of the institutional capital, but it's a very, very slow burn.
Isn't it funny that we kind of give ourselves that labor, and it's expected of diverse and underrepresented people to fund the next generation of underrepresented people?
But it is the reality, right? It is the reality. I mean, it isn't going to happen unless we do it for ourselves. You know, that is the reality. And that's where allies, again, you were talking about it earlier, is so important, you know, but the pressure and the momentum will only come from those who, you know, are in a position to do it, you know.
Yeah, and I think the first ever wonderful video this morning at the opening day from the Ukrainian founder who's now a soldier. He's also said that it's so hard to be on the front line in the battlefield, but you just have to win the game. You just have to win, and that's the same what we are doing, being a female founder and all these different cultures and stuff. You just have to push it, because when you win it, then for the next ones, it's easy to come. And that's why I salute to everybody who represent all the diversity in this VC industry for keeping going and pushing, because this is what makes the change. It's hard to be on the front line, but you have to be there.
I would say for anyone that's kind of listening and is interested, you know, in raising their own fund or investing in, you know, more diverse entrepreneurs, is it's never too soon to start building your network with potential investors. You know, I in some ways am lucky because I advised a lot of LPs in, like, you know, my old role, so I can have very frank conversations with them, and I think they can see beyond colour and gender when they talk to me as a result of that. You have to be building that relationship, so that when you're meeting somebody the first time, it can't be because you're asking them for money, because it's all that they will see. It's all that they will see, and it just doesn't come naturally. I think the ESG thing is hugely interesting, you know, because for LPs that want to invest, right, who have their own ESG mandates, there is a very clear path for them to take, right, to justify why they're writing the checks that they are in the directions. It's there. It already exists, you know. They just don't interpret it in that way. And a number of the LPs that I know, that I've spoken to, when they're talking about the kind of investment that I make, you know, it's about the returns. It's about, you know, the geographies, the verticals. It's about... Totally fair enough, 100%, but they aren't at all thinking about actually what does it mean for their own ESG criteria, and how does it actually help them. And unfortunately, on the returns and the verticals, etc., again, brilliant point well made earlier, that the perception is that if you're backing a niche, therefore your returns are not going to be as good, right? How are you going to build the next unicorn when actually it's just so niche? Well, it's not niche, it's just that you don't do it, right? And you don't understand it.
Okay, so we're coming to the audience for questions in about 2 minutes, so get them ready. Please do ask questions. I'm sure lots of people have questions. If you're an emerging fund manager as well, please. You've got 3 incredible people whose brains you can pick, so let's use them. But I have one last question for me for now, which is, founders who are potentially listening to this, who may be watching the recording afterwards, who are at this point of being like, I have knocked on every flipping door to try and raise some money, and I'm being told, hey, it's a niche, hey, I'm too early, which is what we hear time and time again, whereas sometimes with a white male VC, they have a deck and they get invested in. We hear these stories time and time again. what would you say to them? Because it's not all doom and gloom. Money is being invested. It's the highest year for black women investment in Europe this year. We're seeing more women raising funds. We're seeing more women of color entering into VC. I think there are 3 partners that we have written about in the last 4 months just in Europe who have joined who are women of color, which is fantastic. So what are we saying to these founders that, hey, we want you to innovate. Where can we go to raise money? Let's start with you, Kaidi.
Where to raise the money?
Where to raise the money and maybe some advice for how to keep on going.
I would start with newly established VC funds. Check, there's a couple of databases. Go to Crunchbase or any, go and see the established data of the VC fund. Go and knock on those doors. Because the chance that these, not that they, sorry to say, but some large VCs, they raise the fund number 7 and you go and knock on their door. No, the mentality is this the same. It's the same money, it's the same management. Go and knock on the newly built VCs because they think differently. And there's wonderful, I hope the founder of Wula is also speaking here, but she said it was very tough to raise the funds, and they do the, the package out of the old lamb wool, right? Very cool stuff. And she got 67 no's before she got the first yes, and that's her resilience. So always think about the story, and then the other founder said, I got 100 no's before I got the yes. So count the no's and just don't forget about those no's, because one yes, and that will do the trick.
Thank you. Kiran?
I think for me, definitely you have to build your network at the earliest opportunity. I think you just have to keep on going, right, to exactly that point. I think you also have to be strategic about who you're approaching, and whether it's through your network or just through research, approach people who you feel are aligned, right, that there is some alignment, in terms of what you're looking to do, who you are, who they are, because even if I would like to think that even if what you're building, doesn't quite meet their investment criteria, they will pay it forward and they will move you on to somebody who may be a better fit. And when you can do that with a recommendation, right? It's all warm introductions, unfortunately, are a thing, right? You have to find the people who will help you and have some alignment with you in terms of what you're doing, who are able to help you push forward.
Thank you. Michael?
I think to add on, and this is amazing advice. I think to add on that, I would maybe add one thing is talk to VCs, not about fundraising. Talk about anything else, not about fundraising. Talk about why you started this company. Talk about why you're going to be the biggest in your market. Talk about the challenge that you have. It leaves a real impact if people understand your story and have a better sense of your background without asking them for money right away. To the early point, if you ask for money, there's this wall that goes up, and it goes up really fast. So try having a conversation that is not about fundraising, but it's about you and your company, and start there first.
And if I may, I would like to add one, which is protect your mental health. I think through all of this, either having therapy, safe spaces where you can go to have these real and honest conversations about what it feels like, and to also share real honest tips and advice, exactly like you do at the Founders Society.
And one of the, a couple of my friends are setting up several VC funds, and they very often come and ask, what would you say as a female founder? So what should I put, what should I put in the investment terms? And then one VC, they are now investing out of London, those who want to know early stage VC, and per my request, they will put in every single term sheet that the founder compulsory has to take every year 2 weeks off. Off means offline, 2 weeks, to keep the mental health and all of it. That really, if it's in a vacation, it has to be a vacation. So it's kind of slowly coming in that it's okay for the founder to take time off.
Love that.
That's good.
Right, okay, so there's a roaming mic going around. Who has a question in the audience? The lights are really bright, so please wave if you do have a question.
There's a lady over there, I think.
Oh, fantastic. One over there, and then also one at the front. Where is the roaming mic? Hello, lovely people from Latitude. Can we have the mic, please? I'm just gonna have to come. Do you want to shout and I'll repeat? Oh, is it coming? Fantastic. I would jump off the stage, but I'm wearing heels and I'm worried I'll break my ankle. If you could say who you are and where you're from briefly, that would be great.
Hi, Bindi Korea, venture partner at Molten Ventures in London. Just wanted to say, love the panel, love that we're finally addressing this issue. And I think there's a great article written by a German VC called The Fish Head Stinks from the Top. And I don't know if you've read it yet, but it's worth reading. And to me, the systematic problem, it starts with the LPs. And actually, the LPs are the one who need to think about investing in emerging managers, who will then think about focus on investing in diversity, or with the established managers. So how do we convince the LPs to think more like this? Because I think that's really where the problem starts. So love to hear your views on that.
Great question.
I can say from the LPs that I've spoken to, and as I said, I used to act for a lot of them, so I can kind of have those conversations, is that people that go into LP world, massive generalization coming, people that go into LP world aren't sitting in that world in order to make brave decisions, right? That they're sitting in that world to be able to write safe bets that they won't be criticized for. And that's why definitions of emerging manager mutate into actually someone who's not emerging at all, right? And certainly is not capable of meeting the challenges of diversity. So there has to be a push up in pressure. GPs are required to report. They do that by different ways. We've heard kind of horror stories really of some GPs using their Scout program to push up the diversity statistics. It's all going on, but they are at least required to report, and LPs are not. And for anyone that's tried to fundraise, you don't even know who the LPs are a lot of the time. It's a very murky world. So unfortunately, in the absence of any kind of regulation, in the absence of any pressure, I don't think it will change. It's a generational change such that the demographic is just a different demographic.
Should we be pushing LPs to report? Is that a solution?
Yeah, there are various kind of LP bodies, right, that they're all members of. But it's I'm going to sound, biased, but I'll just say it as I find it. It is a very difficult part of the market. It is not entrepreneurial. There are a lot of people in that market who are of a different generation that just will not understand what we are talking about here. But they're certainly not going to be the ones to put their neck out and write a check, unless they feel like they've got cover from somewhere else. I don't see that. You may have better visibility on that. I don't see it so much right now.
Yeah. The other thing maybe what to do is, because the LPs, they're all the Excel people, and if the Excel shows them what Michael, showed on the stage, that actually diverse teams, they perform the same or even the better, that's one thing. But they need to see the numbers, and they need to see the researches and stats and all of it. And the other thing also, if you think about who is on the public media, which founders are on the public media, again, the white male founders, unicorn founders are on the public media with very little rights about diverse unicorn founders, and that's this kind of, you invest where you see the unicorn is coming from. So both things can be done. This is soft, right?
Yeah.
But to push the visibility.
Thank you so much. Bindi, thank you for the question. Laura, I see you have the mic. You have to ask it briefly. I'm really sorry.
Okay. I know you're talking about numbers. You need to see those numbers to be able to make that impact in the VC space. I want to know, what things are you seeing? What are you measuring? How are you actually being able to look at not just, saying decorative diversity and saying, we have these people here. How are you drawing that line between diversity and actual outcomes in the organization? But then also, how are you looking at inclusion? How are you measuring that to make certain you don't just have people there for show?
Michael, can I hand that one over to you?
Oh, great, thank you. Couldn't you do like an easy question? I mean, if you look at kind of post-George Floyd, a lot of organizations actually had public statements about their diversity efforts. We can hold them accountable and said, in 2020, you said X, we're now two years later, what have you done? That's something you can actually measure. I think for LPs, I'm hoping really that reporting is going to pick up, where we are going to see, let's look at your portfolio and see where you've allocated to diverse and emerging manager. If it's not up to snuff, then you have to increase it next year. I do think like we can hold more people accountable because we have more data available. There's more we can see, and everyone is being public about it anyway. So I think that's helpful. The second thing I would say is there are LPs that are actually doing a lot of work. Having them as allies and having them speak up means more than me saying 1,000 words. Because I think if an LP speaks to another LP that is convinced that diversity works, I think that's kind of a stronger way of convincing them than us being on this panel, to be honest.
Laura, thank you so much for the question. Michael, Kiran, Kaidi, thank you so much for your insights and your time. Take them up on their networking offer as they will be around the conference. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.